The birth of the observer effect. Before the observer effect became a metaphor for consciousness, it was a messy, unavoidable result of physics that refused to behave. It all started in the early 180s with a man named Thomas Young. Young wasn't trying to start a philosophical revolution. He was just studying light. But his simple experiment, shining a beam through two narrow slits, cracked open the door to quantum reality. At first, light seemed to act like waves on water, rippling and overlapping to create bright and dark bands on a screen. This interference pattern was proof that light was a wave, not a stream of particles. Case closed, or so everyone thought. Fast forward a century, and the idea of the atom is back in style. Scientists begin firing single particles, electrons, through those same two slits, expecting them to behave like tiny beads of matter. But when they looked, something impossible happened. Even when fired one at a time, without any chance to bump into each other, the electrons still formed the same interference pattern of waves. Somehow, each electron wasn't choosing one slit over the other. It was behaving as if it traveled through both pathways simultaneously, interfering with itself. And yet, the moment a measuring device was used to figure out which slit it actually passed through, the pattern changed. The interference disappeared. The electrons stopped behaving like waves and started acting like solid particles again. For physicists, this was the intellectual equivalent of gravity suddenly turning off on Tuesdays. Measurement didn't just reveal reality, it changed it. The experiment had given science its strangest riddle. The world at small scales doesn't seem to exist in definite form until it's observed. This was the birth of the observer effect. At its core is something called wave-particle duality, the idea that quantum objects like electrons or photons can behave as both a wave of probabilities and as discrete particles, depending on how we look at them. The wave function, a mathematical description of all the possible states a quantum system could occupy, doesn't represent a thing. It represents potential. Observation forces that cloud of possibilities to collapse into one actual outcome. But what counts as an observation? That's where things get weird. In the first decades of quantum mechanics, legends like Niels Bohr and Werner Heisenberg argued that reality at the quantum level is probabilistic until measurement occurs. Their Copenhagen interpretation said it's not that particles hide from us. It's that they literally don't have definite properties until we measure them. Think of it as the universe waiting for someone, or something, to ask a question before deciding on an answer. But exactly who or what was asking? Was it the human experimenter? The measuring device? Or just any kind of physical interaction? Enter the divide. The mainstream view today, based on what experiments confirm, is that the observer doesn't have to be conscious at all. Any measurement, even one carried out by a detector with no awareness, counts as observation if it collects information about the system. For instance, studies at the Weizmann Institute demonstrated that the more sensitive a detector you place near a slit, the more the interference pattern fades. Increase the detector's precision, and the particle decides on a definite path sooner. Decrease it, and wave behavior returns. The degree of observation literally controls the outcome, which means the system isn't being watched by a mind, just interacted with by a measuring instrument. Yet some early quantum pioneers weren't satisfied. Mathematician John von Neumann took the logic a step further, insisting that the chain of measurement must end somewhere. And that final link, he suggested, could be consciousness itself. Eugene Wigner agreed, proposing that the act of conscious awareness completes the measurement process. Their reasoning wasn't mystical, it was conceptual. If every measuring device is made of particles that are also quantum, what ultimately causes the collapse? The line between object and observer seemed slippery. Maybe, they speculated, the mind plays a unique role as the final witness that turns probabilities into facts. That idea became the seed of what's now known as consciousness-centric interpretations of quantum mechanics. It's not mainstream physics, but it remains intellectually seductive because of the philosophical implications. If consciousness is involved in making reality definite, then awareness would not be something produced by the universe. It would be something participating in its foundation. Still, most contemporary physicists hold a more practical view. They argue that collapse isn't about your personal focus, but about interaction itself. Whenever a quantum system exchanges information with another system, be it a detector, electron beam, or cosmic ray, it loses its superposition of possibilities and takes on a definite state. In this sense, observation is just physics doing what physics does. Consciousness doesn't cause the effect, but we use the same word, observer, because the experimental setup mirrors the act of noticing. That linguistic overlap is why confusion persists. Physically, an observer is any agent of measurement. Psychologically, an observer is a witness with awareness. When these two concepts blend, we start interpreting the quantum observer as a metaphor for consciousness, something that might exist beyond the instruments in a lab. Whether that's true or not, the fact that seeing and measuring alter outcomes challenges our old belief in a detached, objective world. Even in its strict, non-conscious form, the quantum observer effect still says, there is no observation without influence. And that's the subtle bridge to you, because your own mind operates on a similar principle. Every glance, every evaluation, every story you tell about what's happening alters the data streaming into your awareness. The mechanism might not be quantum, but the logic is eerily parallel. Selective focus collapses countless sensory and emotional possibilities into the single version you call my experience. So, the observer effect began in physics, but its echoes have always pointed toward the observer behind the lens. If a lifeless detector can change the nature of an electron by simply registering its path, what might the observing power of a conscious brain do to the subtler particles of thought and perception? So if a detector can change reality, what happens when your own mind pays attention? The perceptual filter. You never see reality directly. Here's a strange truth. You never actually see reality. What you think of as the real world is a filtered projection assembled inside your skull. Your eyes, ears, and skin pick up waves and vibrations, but it's your brain that translates those signals into color, sound, texture, and meaning. You don't see light. You see your brain's interpretation of light. You don't hear vibration. You hear the constructed experience your mind creates from patterns of air pressure. Every moment, your nervous system edits the universe for you, deleting almost everything. If that feels unsettling, good. It should, because the same principle that governs quantum measurement, the idea that observation defines outcome, plays out in your daily perception. The physical world might contain infinite details, but your mind only samples a fraction and then pretends that's the whole picture. Think of it as a highlight reel stitched together by attention, memory, and expectation. That highlight reel becomes your personal universe, as convincing as the real thing, because your brain has no direct access to what it leaves out. Let's test that. Picture two friends remembering the same dinner conversation. One recalls warmth and laughter. The other insists it was tense and awkward. They're not lying. Each genuinely experienced a different event through a different neural lens. The sensory data was the same. The filters weren't. Their brains, guided by emotion and focus, built distinct versions of what happened. That's not philosophical relativism, it's neurobiology. The brain's filtering system is both sophisticated and ruthless. Of the roughly 10 million bits of information entering your senses each second, only about 40 reach conscious awareness. The rest is processed automatically by networks that decide what's relevant. The primary filter here is a group of neurons in the brainstem called the Reticular Activating System, which acts like an executive gatekeeper. It decides what information deserves focus based on what feels meaningful or threatening. In essence, you teach your own perception what to care about. This selective attention is neuroplasticity in motion. Each time you focus on something, your brain strengthens the neural path that supports it. Attention isn't passive, it's sculpting. Imagine your neurons as trails in a forest. Every time you think the same thought or fixate on the same emotion, you walk that trail again, clearing it a little wider, until it becomes the easiest route to take. Eventually, that route feels like your reality, and whatever trails you neglect start to fade under the mental undergrowth. That's why focus is so powerful and dangerous at the same time. The more attention you give fear, resentment, or worry, the more those circuits dominate your map of experience. When you dwell on gratitude, compassion, or opportunity, those pathways grow instead. The physical structure of your attention system mirrors the same rule the quantum world follows. Potential collapses into form according to what is measured, or in your case, what is noticed. Now, this doesn't mean your gaze can twist the laws of physics, but it does mean something profound. Consciousness works as a probability filter. What you look for, you amplify. The rest gets tuned out as if it never existed. That's why one person walks through life convinced the world is hostile, while another sees abundance on every corner. They're not experiencing different planets. They're tuned to different frequencies of reality, curated by their attention. In laboratory settings, psychologists have shown this bias repeatedly. The invisible gorilla test is the poster child. Participants asked to count basketball passes often fail to notice a person in a gorilla suit walking through the scene. They literally don't see it because their attention was instructed elsewhere. The brain edits out what it deems irrelevant to the current goal. That same filter runs your emotional and cognitive life. Your perception is never neutral. It's always an act of participation. Every interpretation, every assumption, every category you apply to what you sense is a mini collapse of meaning. You see a face and instantly decide friendly or dangerous. Your neurons synchronize accordingly. That rapid labeling is efficient but limiting. It traps you in old predictive patterns instead of letting you meet each moment fresh. In other words, reality doesn't just happen to you. You're continuously deciding what version of it exists through what your mind emphasizes. Neuroscientists have tracked this process in real time using functional MRI. When subjects are trained to focus attention deliberately, for example, monitoring their breath or tuning out irrelevant sounds, the activity patterns between the prefrontal cortex and the parietal lobes shift. These regions coordinate what your brain prioritizes. The more consistent the focus, the stronger their connection becomes. That's the biological signature of neuroplastic change forming as attention reshapes the sensory map. So when we talk about perception bias, we're not just referencing cognitive mistakes. We're describing modification of matter inside your head. Synapses either strengthen or weaken depending on how often their circuits are activated. It's learning at the most fundamental level. And because these circuits regulate perception, what you practice noticing becomes what exists for you. If you constantly scan for failure, your neural wiring becomes hypersensitive to error signals. If you practice awareness of subtle beauty, those neurons fire more readily. This principle of selective construction explains why meditation, gratitude logs, or even simple goal reminders work. They're not mystical tricks. They are structured attempts to point the beam of perception at certain data, so the brain can rewire itself around that focus. Over time, your brain literally updates its internal model to match what you care about most. The world feels different because your sensory priorities have changed. That's the hidden quantum resemblance embedded in everyday life. Just as measuring an electron's path eliminates its wave pattern, focusing attention narrows the field of mental possibilities until only one resonates as real. The unseen potentials, alternative interpretations, unnoticed opportunities, latent feelings, vanish into the background probability field of experience. In that sense, perception isn't just passive recording, it's creative interference. Your awareness and the universe meet at the interface of sensation, and from that meeting, a single storyline emerges. Whether you call it physics, psychology, or spirituality, the rule holds. What you observe becomes what you inhabit. Once you realize perception isn't neutral, you stop confusing observation with truth. You start understanding that your brain is an artist, not a camera, and that seeing shapes the scene. Every glance is a brushstroke on the canvas of experience. And when you begin to direct that brush consciously, you gain the ability to alter the picture. Once we realize perception isn't neutral, we can start tracking how attention physically reshapes the mind. Neuroplasticity, the brain that observes itself. Here's where the metaphor turns physical. Your brain isn't a fixed machine. It's a living network, rewiring itself every second in response to what you notice and practice. This property is called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections, strengthen existing ones, or prune away those that fall into disuse. For a long time, scientists believed the brain stopped changing after childhood. Now we know that's completely wrong. You remain a construction site your entire life, and attention is the architect holding the blueprint. Think about what actually happens when you concentrate. When you direct focus toward a task, regions of the prefrontal cortex team up with the parietal lobes to coordinate what's important and what can fade into the background. Functional MRI scans show that simply training sustained attention for a few weeks alters the activity and even thickness of these areas. Neurons that fire together frequently become more synchronized, forging clearer and faster communication pathways. In other words, practice doesn't just make perfect, it literally changes gray matter density. That's where the observer loop begins. Every time you notice something, the neural circuit representing it becomes more stable. You observe, the brain reconfigures, and the next time, that pattern activates more easily. It's a feedback system between awareness and architecture. The act of observing yourself, your thoughts, emotions, sensations, isn't just introspection. It's biochemical editing in real time. Fluid becomes form. The process works with everything from learning new languages to managing stress. When you rehearse a phrase over and over, language areas like Broca's and Wernicke's regions develop stronger white matter tracks linking them. When you practice emotional regulation through mindfulness, the connection between the amygdala, your fear center, and prefrontal cortex weakens, making it easier to stay calm under pressure. It's the same rule. Neurons adapt to what you emphasize. The line between meditation, therapy, and skill training blurs once you see the underlying biology. It's all targeted rewiring through attention. But neuroplasticity isn't automatically benevolent. It doesn't care whether you're building resilience or anxiety, focus or distraction. It's morally neutral. If your daily habit is rumination, your brain strengthens rumination pathways until they fire faster than reasoning or creativity. If you repeatedly focus on threat signals, social rejection, news anxiety, worst-case scenarios, your networks of vigilance expand. You literally become better at detecting danger, even when none exists. Neuroplasticity is obedient but not wise. It builds whatever you practice. That's the double-edged sword. Attention can cultivate serenity or cement suffering. Scientists sometimes call this process self-directed neuroplasticity, the ability to intentionally reshape brain function through conscious focus. Studies have shown that long-term meditators possess measurably thicker cerebral cortex regions linked to sustained attention and self-awareness. Clinical trials reveal that 8 weeks of mindfulness training can significantly change activity within the default mode network, the brain's system for inner chatter and time travel between past and future. After training, subjects show less wandering, more present moment activation, and increased coherence between attention networks. Simply observing experience without reacting reshapes the very circuits that construct experience. It's like performing maintenance on the observer itself. Your brain learns not just from repeated actions, but from repeated ways of noticing. Imagine shining a flashlight into different corners of your mind each day. Wherever that light lingers, neural tissue grows denser, better connected. Over months or years, those structural shifts define your temperament, memories, and worldview. Focus functions like sculpting clay. The longer you hold pressure in one place, the more permanent the imprint. Now combine that with what we already know from quantum logic. In the subatomic world, measurement collapses probabilities into one definite outcome. In the mental world, attention collapses emotional and cognitive possibilities into a single dominant pattern. Watch your worry long enough, and it solidifies into habit. Watch your breath long enough, and calm becomes your baseline. The physics analogy isn't literal. Your thoughts aren't collapsing electrons, but the parallel is striking. Observation turns uncertainty into form. You might think this kind of transformation requires huge effort, but brains are astonishingly responsive. Repetition is the key variable. Every sustained perception, every recurring focus alters synaptic strength through a mechanism called long-term potentiation, the persistent increase in signal transmission between co-activated neurons. That's the microscopic trace of learning, visible under the microscope as dense clusters of receptors sprouting along synapses. The more coherent your focus, the faster this potentiation consolidates, locking experience into structure. So, if you spend hours scrolling through outrage, your brain is training itself for agitation. If you dedicate those same hours to studying, meditating, or solving creative problems, your neural wiring becomes tuned for clarity and patience. Attention isn't only the gateway to understanding reality, it's the raw material building your mind. There's a story from cognitive training research that perfectly captures this. Participants practicing focused attention meditation for just 2 weeks not only reported better concentration, but showed increased coupling between frontal attention circuits and sensory cortices. They literally became more aware of subtle sounds and bodily sensations that others missed. Awareness expanding awareness, an upward spiral powered by neuroplastic feedback. Observe yourself learning, and learning accelerates. But remember, plasticity cuts both ways. In neurological rehabilitation, therapists help stroke patients regain movement through constraint-induced therapy. Forcing use of an impaired limb stimulates dormant neural routes until new pathways restore function. Yet if avoidance sets in, if patients stop trying, those neurons atrophy, cementing the deficit. The same principle governs thought patterns. Abandon curiosity, and the mind's flexibility hardens into dogma. Keep questioning, and synaptic landscapes stay fluid. What's fascinating is that these changes sometimes override genetics. Studies on attention training show that environmental practice can modify the expression of genes linked to focus efficiency. That means what you train can influence which genes switch on or off in the circuits managing awareness. Your biology listens to your habits of observation. So the next time you catch yourself replaying the same anxious scenario, realize that you're not only recreating the feeling, you're reinforcing the wiring that produces it. You're teaching your brain that this loop matters. Luckily, the reverse is true. Redirect attention to an alternative pattern, gratitude, presence, curiosity, and the competing neural circuit signal begins to outcompete the old one. Over time, the probability field of your inner life tilts toward wellness instead of distress. Neuroplasticity is the bridge between mind and matter, the practical manifestation of the observer effect inside your skull. It proves that observation doesn't just describe, it designs. Through deliberate awareness, you can become participant and programmer at once. The brain that observes itself becomes both scientist and subject, constantly running experiments called thoughts. Every moment of noticing is a measurement that leaves a trace in flesh and electricity. Now for the twist. Your perception bias doesn't just shape thoughts. It influences what reality registers.